Good morning. One of the better known practices during the 9 days is that of refraining from eating meat and drinking wine. Why do we do so? There are two basic reasons. The first is Mishanichnas Avim Matin B'Simcha, that we know that during this time period of the 9 days, we minimize our happiness, our celebrations, and in Simcha El B'Basar B'Yayin, and we know that wine and meat are two things that we generally assume bring us to the Simcha, and therefore many poskim say, based off of that, that's why we refrain from eating meat and drinking wine. Others, based off of the Gemara and Baba Basra. The Gemara writes that there were those after the Churban who wanted to get rid of meat and wine altogether from our diets because those were things which were brought upon the Mizbeach, and it's inappropriate. Now that we no longer have the Mizbeach, how can we sit here and celebrate and eat and drink meat and wine? It seems to be inappropriate. However, Rabbi Yeshua came along and he said, based off of that, we shouldn't eat bread, and it doesn't seem to be something which would be practical, and therefore he convinced them that it's not feasible to make such a takana, such a institution of removing meat and wine altogether. But the Gra points out that therefore, based off of that, during the 9 days when we have a heightened sensitivity towards the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, so it would be appropriate to refrain. And that's really a logic used by Rav Moshe Feinstein also when it comes to refraining from music during the 3 weeks. So what would be a difference between these two approaches? A nafkamina would be something like drinking liquor, right? A non-wine but alcoholic beverage. So if you say that the issue is bringing us to simcha, so then certainly these things bring us to simcha. But if you say it's based off of what was brought on his bath, so that would not be a problem. And there indeed are many that are lenient in this regard. Now, what is called meat? So meat, the prohibition of eating meat includes anything which is cooked with actual meat. So any food or any food item which has actual meat in it, even if it's not a piece of flesh, a piece of meat, if it's cooked together with meat, would be problematic. However, anything cooked in meat equipment is certainly not a problem. Now, what about feeding children? So feeding children, the Magen Avraham is lenient and says that they don't have a problem of mourning. Maybe when they get to the age of chinuch, that we should train them in such a way that there's no problem for them to eat. And Rav Shechter writes that it's true they don't have an obligation of mourning children, but they do have an obligation to remember the Beis HaMikdash. And since not eating meat is really based off of, like we said in the Gemara, of remembering the Beis HaMikdash, it is appropriate, certainly once they reach the age of chinuch, to be machmir. Now, the Mishnah Berurah points out that he's even more machmir, that we cannot feed children even below the age of chinuch with our yadayim, with our hands. We can't, just like we can't feed them non-kosher, so that applies to minhagim as well, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah writes we are not able to feed our children meat during this time. The post can point out, in general, the consensus does seem to be that we try to be careful for feeding meat to children at this time, even below the age of chinuch. However, because of the nature, and it is a minhag, and there are those that are lenient, if there's a particular need, a child is very particular or weak, or certainly one that is ill, there is plenty of room to be lenient in those cases, but generally the practice is to be machmir and not to do so. Have a fantastic day. Fantastic Shabbos.